Have you ever wondered what it's like to be truly alone? Not just in the physical sense, but in a way where the walls themselves seem to breathe with a life of their own. Tonight I've got two stories for you. Both are about ordinary people, alone in what they thought were the safest of places, their own homes. But little did they know, they had just stepped into the realm of Mr. Scary Guy. Prepare yourself for a journey beyond the ordinary, into the shadows of your deepest fears. Welcome to the world of Mr. Scary Guy. My parents had only been gone for a few hours when the house started feeling different. At 17, I wasn't exactly scared of being home alone, but there was something about our new house that never sat right with me. It was a modest place, a classic suburban home in a quiet neighborhood. The kind of place where people waved at each other from their lawns and kids rode bikes until dark. I was lying on the couch, lazily flipping through channels, trying to find something worth watching. The move had been stressful, especially with school starting soon. But tonight I had the house to myself. My parents were visiting friends out of town, and they wouldn't be back until Sunday evening. I wasn't planning anything wild, just a quiet night with some junk food and whatever movie I could find on TV. As I settled into the couch, I noticed that the house was unusually quiet. Too quiet, even for a place tucked away in the suburbs. The kind of quiet that makes you aware of every creak and groan of the old wooden floors, every rustle of the leaves outside. I tried to brush it off, but something about that silence made me uneasy. An hour or so later, I heard it, the unmistakable creak of a door opening slowly. The sound came from the basement, the one part of the house I had avoided since we moved in. The basement door was heavy, with a lock that seemed too secure for a place that just held old furniture and dusty boxes. The noise wasn't loud, just a faint, drawn-out creak, like someone pushing a door open ever so slowly. I sat up, every muscle in my body suddenly tense. The TV was still blaring, but all I could hear was that door. I told myself it was nothing, just the house settling or maybe the wind. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Something was off, and I could feel it crawling up my spine. I got up and walked to the hallway where the basement door was. It was slightly ajar, just enough to show the pitch-black darkness below. My first instinct was to close it and go back to the couch, but a part of me, maybe curiosity, maybe fear, compelled me to peek inside. I reached for the light switch and flicked it on, but the bulb didn't respond. Of course, it had to be out now, of all times. I considered grabbing a flashlight, but instead, I took a deep breath and slowly started down the creaky wooden steps. The air grew colder with each step, and the smell of damp earth filled my nose. As I reached the bottom, I could barely see anything, but I felt a presence. It was like the air itself was pushing against me, telling me to turn back. I fumbled around in the dark, trying to get my bearings. My fingers brushed against something cold and metallic. A chain, maybe? I pulled it, and a single dim light bulb flickered on, casting weak, trembling shadows across the room. The basement was just as I expected. Old, dusty, filled with forgotten things from the previous owners. But there was something else, too. A feeling of wrongness. Like the air was heavier down here, thick with something I couldn't quite put my finger on. I scanned the room, and then I saw it. Two faintly glowing eyes staring back at me from the far corner of the basement. My heart stopped. I froze, unable to move or even scream. The eyes didn't move, but I could hear something shifting in the darkness. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Was it a trick of the light? An animal that somehow got inside? But no, those eyes were too high up, too human. And then, the basement door slammed shut behind me, plunging me into complete darkness. I scrambled for the stairs, tripping and nearly falling in my panic. I threw myself against the door, pounding on it, desperate to get out. After what felt like an eternity, it finally gave way, and I burst into the hallway, slamming the door behind me. I stood there, breathing heavily, my heart hammering in my chest. What the hell had just happened? I leaned against the wall, trying to calm down, but my mind wouldn't stop racing. What were those eyes? What was down there? I wanted to believe it was just my imagination, but it felt too real, too vivid. I spent the rest of the night on the couch, wide awake, with all the lights on. Every little noise made me jump, and I kept glancing at the basement door, half expecting it to open on its own. But it stayed shut, and eventually, exhaustion took over, and I drifted off into an uneasy sleep. The next day, I tried to put it out of my mind. Maybe I was just tired, stressed from the move and the new school year. But as the day wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong with that basement. Something that shouldn't be there. I didn't dare go down there again, but the memory of those eyes haunted me. When my parents came home, I considered telling them what happened, but I knew they wouldn't believe me. They'd probably say it was just a dream, or that I was letting my imagination get the best of me. So I kept quiet, but I made sure to avoid the basement at all costs. Weeks passed, and life started to return to normal. The incident faded into the back of my mind, and I managed to convince myself that it was all just a weird fluke. But then, one night, it happened again. I was lying in bed, drifting off to sleep when I heard it. The creak of the basement door opening. This time, I knew I wasn't imagining it. I bolted upright, my heart pounding in my chest. The sound was unmistakable, slow and deliberate, like someone, or something, was pushing the door open inch by inch. I threw the covers off and rushed to the hallway, but when I got there, the door was closed. I stood there, staring at it, trying to make sense of what was happening. I knew I heard it open. I wasn't dreaming. But there it was, shut tight, just as it had been all evening. I hesitated for a moment, then reached out and grabbed the doorknob. It was cold to the touch, colder than it should have been. I took a deep breath and slowly opened the door, half expecting to see those eyes staring back at me from the darkness. But the basement was empty, just as it had been the first time. I stood at the top of the stairs, listening intently. The house was silent, but that same feeling of wrongness lingered in the air. I couldn't explain it, but I knew something was down there, something that didn't belong. I flicked on the light, and this time it worked, casting a dim glow over the steps leading down into the basement. I took a tentative step forward, then another, descending into the cold, musty darkness. The light bulb flickered slightly, casting long, wavering shadows across the walls. I scanned the room, looking for any sign of what I had seen before, but everything was still and quiet. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A figure standing in the far corner of the room, shrouded in darkness. My breath caught in my throat as I slowly turned to face it. The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound, but I could feel its presence, heavy and oppressive, like it was staring right through me. I blinked, and it was gone, vanished into the shadows. But the feeling of being watched didn't go away. If anything, it intensified, making my skin crawl with unease. I backed away slowly, not daring to take my eyes off the spot where the figure had been. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I heard a soft, barely audible whisper. It was so faint that I almost didn't catch it, but the words sent a chill down my spine. Get out. I didn't need to be told twice. I turned and bolted up the stairs, slamming the door behind me. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning, I begged my parents to move, to get out of the house as soon as possible. They looked at me like I was crazy, but I didn't care. I couldn't stay there, not with whatever was lurking in that basement. Eventually, they agreed, though I don't think they ever really understood why I was so desperate to leave. We moved out a few weeks later, and I never looked back. But even now, years later, I still have nightmares about that house, about those eyes watching me from the darkness. Sometimes, late at night, I can still hear that basement door creaking open, and I wonder if whatever was down there is still waiting for someone to make the mistake of opening it again. When I first moved into my new apartment after the divorce, I was just looking for a place to escape, something cheap and far from the memories of my old life. The building was old, but it was quiet, which was exactly what I needed. Or so I thought. The apartment itself was nothing special. A small, one-bedroom unit with peeling wallpaper and creaky floors. The kind of place that had seen better days, but I wasn't looking for luxury. I just needed somewhere to be alone, to sort out my thoughts, and try to move on with my life. My first night there, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to ignore the creaks and groans of the old building settling. The walls were thin, and I could hear the muffled sounds of my neighbors going about their lives. Footsteps above me, a TV playing somewhere down the hall, the distant hum of a washing machine. Around midnight, I finally drifted off, but I was woken up by a sound, my phone ringing. I glanced at the clock. It was 3 a.m. Groggy, I reached for the phone on the nightstand. The number was unknown, but I answered it anyway. "Hello?" I mumbled, still half asleep, but there was no response. Just silence. I repeated myself, "Hello?" Still nothing. I hung up and tried to go back to sleep, but something about the call left me uneasy. The next night it happened again. Same time, same unknown number, same silence on the other end. This time, I stayed on the line, listening for any hint of noise, breathing, a rustle, anything. But there was just dead air, and then the call ended. By the third night, I was too unnerved to sleep at all. I sat up in bed, waiting for the call. 3 a.m. came and went without incident, and I began to think maybe it was over. Maybe it was just a glitch, some random telemarketer or a wrong number. But then, at 3:15, the phone rang again. I answered immediately. "Who is this?" I demanded. Silence. "If this is some kind of joke, it's not funny," I yelled into the phone. And then, I heard it. A faint whisper, just barely audible, like someone speaking from the other side of the room.
"I'm watching you,"
it said. My blood ran cold. I jumped out of bed and started checking all the locks on my doors and windows. Everything was secure, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. I could feel eyes on me, even though I was alone in the apartment. I turned off all the lights and sat in the darkness, trying to make sense of what was happening. The phone rang again, and I answered, but this time I stayed silent. I listened carefully, and then I heard it. The sound of breathing, slow and deliberate, like whoever was on the other end was enjoying this. I couldn't take it anymore. I threw the phone across the room, and it shattered against the wall. The call stopped after that, but I never really felt alone in that apartment again. I moved out as soon as my lease was up, but sometimes, in the dead of night, I still hear that phone ringing, and I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't answered it. After that first week of disturbing calls, I tried to go about my life as normally as possible, but the memory of those whispers lingered in my mind. I started noticing little things that seemed off. The way shadows would shift in the corners of my vision. The strange sounds in the walls at night that couldn't just be the old building settling. It was like the apartment itself was alive, watching me, waiting for something. I began to avoid going home, staying late at work, or going out to bars just to be around people. Anything to delay returning to that empty, silent apartment. But every night, when I finally dragged myself back home, I felt that same oppressive atmosphere, like the walls were closing in around me. One night, I came home later than usual, a little drunk and more than a little tired. As I stumbled into the apartment, I noticed something strange. The air was thick, heavy with a smell I couldn't quite place. It was like a mix of damp earth and something metallic, like blood. I shook my head, trying to clear it, but the smell only grew stronger. I turned on the lights, but the apartment seemed darker than usual, the shadows deeper and more menacing. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just my imagination, the alcohol messing with my head. But as I moved through the apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I went to the kitchen to get a glass of water, hoping it would clear my mind. But when I opened the fridge, the smell hit me full force, nearly knocking me off my feet. I gagged, slamming the door shut, but the stench clung to me, filling my lungs with every breath. That's when I heard it, the sound of a phone ringing. But it wasn't my phone. It was coming from the living room, a low, insistent ring that sent chills down my spine. I hadn't replaced the phone I'd thrown, so what was making that noise? I hesitated, then slowly made my way to the living room. The ringing grew louder, more urgent, like it was calling me, demanding my attention. When I reached the room, I saw it. My old phone, the one I'd shattered, lying on the coffee table, completely intact. My hands were trembling as I picked it up. The screen was cracked, but the phone was still working, the caller ID showing that same unknown number. I didn't want to answer it, but something compelled me to, like a force I couldn't resist. "Hello?" I whispered, my voice shaking. Silence. Then, the faint sound of breathing. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead as the breathing continued, slow and deliberate, each exhale sending chills down my spine. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. I was paralyzed with fear, my heart pounding in my chest. And then, the whisper came again, more distinct this time.
"I'm inside."
My blood ran cold. I dropped the phone, my mind racing. Inside? Inside where? The apartment? My thoughts were a jumbled mess, and before I could make sense of it, I heard a noise. A soft creak like someone stepping on a loose floorboard. It was coming from the bedroom. I turned toward the hallway, my heart pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. The light in the hallway flickered, casting eerie, shifting shadows on the walls. I took a step forward, then another, my feet moving as if they had a mind of their own. As I reached the doorway to the bedroom, I heard the creak again, louder this time, like someone was moving around inside. I swallowed hard, trying to summon the courage to push the door open. My hand shook as I reached for the doorknob, the cold metal sending a jolt of fear through me. I slowly turned the knob and pushed the door open, half expecting to see someone standing there. But the room was empty. The bed was unmade, the closet door slightly ajar, but there was no sign of anyone being there. No one but me. I let out a shaky breath, trying to convince myself that it was all in my head. But as I stepped into the room, I noticed something strange. The closet door wasn't just ajar. It was moving. Just a tiny bit, barely noticeable, but enough to send a wave of terror through me. I stood frozen, staring at the closet, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. And then, slowly, the door began to open wider, inch by inch, until it was fully open. The shadows inside were deep, almost pitch black, but I could feel something in there, something watching me. My instincts screamed at me to run, to get out of the apartment and never come back. But I couldn't move, couldn't tear my eyes away from that closet. And then, out of the darkness, I saw it. A pale hand reaching out toward me, the fingers long and thin, like something that wasn't quite human. That was enough to break the spell. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over my own feet as I fled the room. I didn't stop running until I was outside, panting and sweating, my heart racing like I'd just run a marathon. I didn't care that I was barefoot, that I had left everything behind in that apartment. All I knew was that I had to get as far away from there as possible. I never went back to that apartment. I left everything behind, my clothes, my furniture, even my phone. I didn't care. I moved in with a friend and found a new place a few months later, but the memory of that night haunts me to this day. Sometimes, late at night, when everything is quiet, I can still hear that phone ringing in the back of my mind, and I wonder what would have happened if I had stayed in that apartment. But I don't dwell on it for long. Some things are better left unanswered. 2 stories, 2 lonely nights where the silence was more terrifying than any scream. Whether it's the creak of a door in the dead of night or the ring of a phone that should never have called. Remember, when you're home alone, you're never really alone. There's always something watching, waiting, just out of sight. This is Mr. Scary Guy saying, "Good night. Dare you to go to sleep after hearing that?" Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe by clicking the icon above. We've also got a playlist full of scary stories on your left side and a suggested video you'll love on the right. Choose one and keep the scares going.